Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Oak, Sales and Marketing Director at ComXo. I'd like to welcome you all to this co-hosted panel discussion between ComXo, CTS and CBRE, where we want to discuss how your firms can measure the success of your hybrid working strategies. Today, we've gathered experts from the world of IT, FM, tech, property, and workplace services to ensure we get a really insightful sort of 360 view on this topic. So just to kick things off, I'd like to welcome Andrew Try, Managing Director from ComXo, David Fazakali, Legal CIO from CTS. We've got Henry Ward, Senior Director at CBRE, and also Matt Beer, Business Unit Lead at CBRE as well. So just to sort of frame the session, with the return of to the office well underway, hybrid working remaining the norm, we're going to spend the next hour discussing the future of these working practices within our firms and what we can learn from other industries who I guess embraced hybrid working practices long before the pandemic. Our panel today will also highlight how we can use the sort of ready and available data to ensure these policies are not only monitored, but I guess ultimately successful in the longer term. As I said, we've got an awful lot to cover, so I'm going to keep this high paced. This is interactive, so please feel free to ask any questions throughout the session using the Q&A function that you can find at the bottom of your screen. I'll attempt to sort of weave them in where appropriate. However, I'll be leaving further space at the end, hopefully about 10 minutes, where we can sort of fill in any sort of questions there. We'll also be recording the session with a copy available to all attendees as well. So that's a little bit of the admin. So to get things started, I think, Andrew, going to start with you, if that's okay. So you're regularly speaking with advising managing partners, COOs from the largest law firms. You know, what are the biggest challenges they're trying to overcome as they're moving back into the office?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, well, what has been fascinating over this last 18 months is the ability for myself to speak to COOs and managing partners, and the wonders of Zoom and Teams means that rather than having to get a lunch date in their diaries, I've been able to do it on a sort of ad hoc basis. And as you will know, Paul, over this last period, we've done a number of these webinars that has sort of tracked the progress of what is in the minds of the CEO of a major law firm. ComXo has 9 top 20 law firms, and I think it is interesting that it's almost gone round in a circle. When we first started off, nobody had a clue what was going on. Then we all thought we knew what was going to happen, and we all devised plans to get people back into the office to try and get back to what was the old normal. Then we decided that that wasn't going to happen as we went back into lockdown again. Now we've gone through what we appears to be the worst of it, and people are grappling with, you know, what this new normal is going to be. I was speaking to a COO of one of our top clients, and he described the current situation as wading through treacle, which I thought was quite interesting. So what I think is, you know, insightful is trying to divide the tactical things that are going on at the moment, the things that we're all seeing right, you know, up front with, you know, the more strategic. So tactical things that everybody is struggling with is this, you know, this thing around talent. How do we keep people in our organization? The great resignation, I read about it in the FT all the time, and I can see it, that it's a real, you know, it's a real thing. So a lot of the CEOs are wondering, you know, how do we manage to keep the talent that we've got, and does our environment currently support that? Another CEO of one of our top clients said, what exactly is hybrid working? You know, I still don't really know what it is. And certainly, you know, just apocryphally, you know, the experience we've all had of trying to use Teams and Zoom when everybody is not sat at home or in the office, and we've got groups working together. And there was a lot of conversations around the fact, well, it just simply doesn't work. So, you know, what's that? The other issue that I'm hearing a lot of is driving our businesses for outcomes, not looking at how people actually engage with the, you know, the workplace or the workspace. You know, we should be measuring outcomes. So a lot about measuring, you know, work and outcomes there. The underlying thing that is of interest, I think, is that every single one of our clients has done rather well through lockdown and through the last period of time. they're all looking at substantial amounts of profits. And it seems as though the operations have stood up to the worst of that. They've come through it, and actually they've made an awful lot of money. So the sorts of things on the lips, and what's being discussed now is, how do you invest that money to drive the organizations forward? And there is this, a lot of talk around the next generation law firm, the law firm, that's going to take us through for the next 5 years. The understanding that law firms are behind the curve, way behind the curve, and there is an opportunity now to start to push this forward, to create this modern law firm. So I'm hearing things like centralization, optimization, virtualization of back office services, all driven to try and take friction out of these organizations, because they realize that the client experience has moved from just being about the traditional client, i.e. the people who pay the fees, to actually the workforce who now are the internal client. You've got to keep them happy. Well-being, wellness, mental health. That shift is palpable. And certainly up at a major law firm the other day, talking about how they are moving their on-site fine dining type facilities to meeting rooms, because they want to create an environment where people want to come into work rather than trying to impress clients on site. So that's what I'm hearing. So it's quite a melee as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, no, really interesting. And I guess, Matt, that sort of tees you up quite nicely, because obviously you're privy to, a wide range of industries. So in terms of the patterns forming in terms of workplace strategies across various sectors, where does the legal sector sort of fall into this?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. A number of great points that Andrew's made, and I think the one thing I'll take out of the last 18 months, as painful as it's been a catalyst for change and questioning how we do things within the workplace, and also with FM and workplace services. So there's a melting pot of different ideas. There is a slide. I don't know, Emma, do you want to present that slide? If you can, that'd be great. Just a slide that I was going to flick up quickly just to show people where a number of industries. So being a business unit leader, I'm quite fortunate in having a number of customers, different verticals that I look after. And in front of you, what you have here is just a bit of the science that CBRE does as a business that we've taken from this year, and looking at the trends within workplace and real estate strategy. So just looking at legal and professional services, you can see there that there is a real big focus on talent. And I think that ties into what Andrew was saying just a little bit earlier, that talent seems to be a real challenge. And we've seen that about in our forecourts and right up through different levels and positions across the UK industry. But just talking about the undecided forming and acting, in terms of real estate strategy, what we're seeing as well is that the legal and professional services are still thinking about what they're doing. The action is a little bit slower. So if I take the pharma customers and certainly some technology customers that I'm working with, they have made really clear, in terms of their real estate strategy, in terms of whether they're de-densifying their space, whether they're reducing their space, whether they're looking for grade A space because they want the best possible space and that net zero carbon and sustainable space. There's a great well-being factor, and they want to create an experience for their employees. That for them is absolutely key. And I think what we see here is a big, broad picture of all our industries that we're working with, and it's still very messy and it's still very choppy. And what that means is, I think within this year, remainder of this year, there is still some nervousness in with the market in terms of what people are going to do and how they're going to commit to real estate and workplace services. And I think that's going to continue maybe into Q2 next year. We need to get through this winter period, and I think that's what people are relying on. A good winter, get out of it, and then hopefully people will be sitting up into the spring. That was what we were hoping for actually this year, funnily enough. So when I was having a conversation 12 months ago at this time, you'll remember that we were hoping we were coming out of the pandemic, and then next year in April, there was a whole feeling that, the spring will be really sunshine and everyone return back to normal. But I think reality is it's going to be next year, or we hope it will be. Because we certainly will need some positive news. But as I say, the legal and professional services, they're certainly still looking to form their ideas and what they're doing with workplace services and their strategy. and taking forward what does that mean to them? How do they modernize themselves? And what are their employee base looking for as well? I think that's a really big question. What are employees looking for in the new world, and what kind of rules are we going to be putting on people when they return back to the office?
Nice. As I said, I think it's incredibly interesting just seeing it is quite choppy, but you can see some of the companies actually coming together and I guess sort of taking learnings or trying to take learnings from each other. And I guess sort of just to expand on that point, David, I know, we've spoken a fair bit about getting sort of policies right and wrong, and for hybrid working may lead to sort of people's arms race, with staff retention, employee attraction being high stakes in the market. From your perspective, how are you seeing that impacting law firms' thinking?
Well, hello everybody. Nice to be here. Tuesday last week was the British Legal Technology Forum, an opportunity, or one of the first opportunities for lots of law firms to get back together for real in person, and it was well attended. And there's a few themes that came out. I had the pleasure of hosting the I Manage Tech stage all day, and one of the issues that came up time and time again from people was this feeling or anecdotal evidence that an arms race was beginning for staff, specifically younger staff, actually, who now have particular demands coming out on their employers, especially as there's differences of what employers are doing and law firms are doing in the marketplace. So I just thought I'd spend a few minutes trying to explore where I think those areas are coming. And I've got sort of four main themes: technology, facilities, policy, and human factors. So I think what's driving this, let's look at technology. So certainly for younger lawyers and trainees and others sort of working from the home environment, is it any good? Is it a clean and easy sort of work from home environment where the tech is concerned? Is it fit for purpose? Is it game changing? Does it go beyond that? Actually, is it remarkably good? Is it actually an improved experience? Is it paid for by the firm? Have people had to go and invest in their own tech at home, or are firms being quite proactive in providing some of the home technology as well as the in-office work technology? And all the things you'd expect around technical platforms, around agility, flexibility, accessibility. So there are technology factors in people's minds about, the ease of work and how good the tech is. From a facilities point of view, home office and home bills, everybody's home office environment might be different. And I'm not going to steal my own thunder from a question later on about inequality in the home place. I'll park that one. But, the home office environment is different from person to person. And that is a driving factor. And in that, how helpful are the law firms and others in creating an acceptable home environment, or actually a very good home environment? Do they fund it in any way? Or again, the bills, the sort of the electric bills and the gas bills, and we know the gas bills are going up at the moment and people are working from home. Are companies funding that or not? Is the burden switching? And what does that mean for people's travel time? I've heard some firms say, we're not spending on travel so you can pay for your own home bills. So there's the whole conundrum of differences there. And of course, in a hybrid world where you're sometimes in the office and sometimes at home, rather than all the time at home, perhaps, that adds another layer of complexity. So I think also, how easy is it to work from home? How easy is it to work from the office? And how easy is it to do both? Ease of access to these things is another driving factor. From a policy point of view, for people making policy, what is the right to work from home? Is there a right to work from home? Has that been written into contracts? Are people rewriting contracts? Does flexibility as standard, is that the new mantra, or will it all change next year, and will it be 80% back in the office? So what? And I think some people don't know where that is, and they still feel a little bit trapped by it. And so, there's a lot of people navel gazing, trying to reimagine the place of work and where those places of work are. And I don't think people feel settled yet on what the model will be, certainly into 2022. And I'll finish on the human factors. Do people feel supported in the environment they're in? So if they're working predominantly from home, do they feel supported in the same way they do in the office, from a personal management, from a collaboration, from an interaction, from a support point of view, from a wellness and a well-being point of view? Is that a quality of opportunity? I'll come back to that later. Genuine, out of sight, out of mind if you're not in the office, and some people have returned to work. So culture fit. in the new hybrid world culture sort of changes. All of those factors and many more, right, are what is going on in the minds of many people. And certainly the feedback on Tuesday was that the Generation Z, the younger persons going through training and other things, they have quite high expectations and they're making their judgments now. And that's where the arms race is coming. And we are seeing some evidence, even I think in the legal tech industry, of higher wage demands and people demanding contracts that have these clauses and flexibility built in. So I think some of the challenges for firms on that is, are firms ahead of the wave and the curve, or reacting to it, or they don't know how to react to this yet? Is it a fad? Okay, will it all be over in 2022 and it's 80? It won't go back to how it was, but if it's 70-80% back to how it was, is there a trap? Are you going to create some longer term problems by agreeing all these new contracts and conditions for people, and then you're stuck with those terms and conditions with a cohort for time? Or if you're not ahead of that curve offering those, are you going to lose out to those firms that have already made the decisions and been bold and said this is the new way of work forever, permanency? And are you going to lose out to those people who are offering those things as standard? Just some thoughts just on that particular point, and some of the feedback from last Tuesday from different law firms.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I know we're going to sort of, probably try and wrap up with this sort of the habits creeping back in as well, and what are the policies that are going to stay, and what are the sort of bad habits that we're already, we had a discussion last week, weren't we, in terms of some of those bad habits returning. And I think that's a really interesting point, that. So just to sort of bring Henry, you into the discussion sort of from a sort of property side of things, in terms of your view on the legal sector with respect to portfolio strategy, what are the challenges and solutions have they faced sort of during this period?
Thanks, Paul. So my name's Henry Ward. I work with occupiers across mainly central London, but across the world as well. I've got a couple of clients who need help and advice across EMEA. So it's only to do a tenant rep. And a lot of the themes that have been brought up already are things that I have heard being discussed in a number of discussions around what type of buildings people should be acquiring, what they do with their existing real estate. I mean, the first issue that everybody had with COVID was how to create a COVID compliant workplace. And we probably all remember sort of green dots and stickers and arrows and face masks and copious amounts of hand wash and everything else everywhere. And the office being a pretty painful place to spend time, particularly if people were few and far between. And it's fair to say CBRE is one example of back in the brokerage teams almost 5 days a week, which I can tell you is a nicer place to be. That's my own personal view. The other part during 2020, I spent a lot of my time talking about cost mitigation and right sizing, and all occupiers were looking at ways, this is across the spectrum, not just the legal services firms, but looking at ways to try and save money from their existing real estate. And of course, that was difficult in a market where, of course, demand was weaker than you'd expect because of, COVID was impacting people's need to expand or to move offices. And of course, then people tried to adapt to hybrid working as people have come back to the workplace. And I think both Andrew and David have probably dealt with that better than I'm going to try to. But there are a lot of questions that firms are asking of both their staff, but also their advisors in terms of how their workplace can actually support that going forwards. I want to bring up a couple of themes that haven't been mentioned, and these are the conversations that are going on at the moment around how a building supports a business longer term. I mean, communication is something that I think Andrew dealt with pretty well in terms of we all see pluses and minuses to using both Teams and Zoom and everything else out there. And who hasn't been to a meeting where they're sitting on, oh my goodness, Cisco, I haven't got that one downloaded on my iPad. Quick, try and find the link and all the rest of it, and I can't find the passcode. It works for some things, it doesn't work so well for others. And I've had 2 face-to-face meetings this morning. I can tell you I found them immeasurably more helpful, but this is a really great way of using this technology to bring lots of different people together at a different time during the day. So I do buy into that. One of the big concerns that I know a lot of my law firm clients have around the hybrid working models, and certainly people working from home, is training and development of staff. That it's all about attraction, retention of talent, but how do you train that talent in the first place? And the traditional model of an associate and a partner that model can be quite heavily broken by a partner who finds it much easier perhaps to work from home, because as David was talking about, their home office setup is far better perhaps than juniors. And I do have concern about how you continue that development process. I also think that, as again, I think Andrew and David picked this up, client interaction in offices is changing. Clients are coming to offices now not necessarily for fine dining and sort of the partners meeting twice a year. They're coming in to find out new and exciting ways of information, what's going on in the market. And certainly the way that we're interacting with our clients has changed very considerably over the last 18 months. One of the things I will pick up that I don't think others will have touched on yet is talking about how markets are challenging law firms. Now, I think everyone would expect, given everyone trying to probably downsize and reduce their occupancy costs, that there would be a lot of available space on the market and that demand would be pretty light. Actually, we found quite the opposite, and particularly in London and most European cities, supply is pretty weak. Now, what's actually driving that is best-in-class buildings. So for second-hand, what we call grey space, I like calling it grey space, it makes me feel less grey. We're talking about tenant second-hand space here. And there's obviously quite a lot of that on the market. But that's not the sort of space that most high-end law firms want. What most high-end law firms will be moving to is high-quality, brand-new buildings. And that's why we've seen incredible success in buildings like 22 Bishopsgate, which is a 1.3 million square foot tower in the middle of the city. Very high quality, very high specification, full of amenities. And a lot of firms, we've seen Covington's move in there, we've seen Skadden Arps just agree a deal to move in there. What is driving their decision to go to much more expensive buildings? I mean, Skadden's were paying about £40 a foot in Canary Wharf. Moving into 22 Bishopsgate, they're going to be paying a rent with an 8 in front of it. So they're almost doubling their rent cost. But it's a very efficient building. It runs at 1 to 8. They can bring in a new hybrid working model and all the amenities, meeting spaces, and cafes and other facilities they might need, they're provided by the landlord. The final example I want to give, there's two other things I'm going to talk about, but final example I want to give on that also is Allen and Overy, who've just moved out of 10 Broadgate. Good building, nothing wrong with it really. I mean, it's 15 years old, so it probably needs a bit of upgrading. They've moved into 1 Broadgate, which is a brand new building at British Land have developed. The reason for driving that move was really around the ESG criteria, sustainability, and the performance of that building. And we will see many more law firms start to consider that around their moves. And that's why there are so many law firms looking to pre-let, particularly in London, but across EMEA as well. There's a really strong level of activity at the 100,000 square foot plus bracket. There's firms looking to find new HQs that really set a new standard, not just for their clients and reputation, but also, as David was talking about, for their colleagues and for staff. The final point I want to make is where firms have been trying to work out how to right-size, save cost, and look at new ways of working. They've been using lease renewals, or what I would call a lease restructure, as a way to really drive that. That's probably why I'm working on about 7 at the moment for different law firms across London, where firms are looking at their existing liabilities and say, well, how can I create some value for the landlord so I can share in it, so I can create a longer term platform in my existing building and maybe pay for a new fit out, extend the lease, give me a longer write-off period and get some value out of that deal. Allows me to do what I need to do in the office, because obviously the typical barrier to improving workplace is CapEx. And a lot of occupiers find that more difficult to raise, and this is one way of doing that. So we're seeing a lot of that in my market.
Henry, I hope you don't mind a cross question, but it sounds like what you're describing there is something that adds to the arms race. I was very focused on the home environment, but you're actually saying that the office environment or the new office environments could be part of that new arms race, with firms being in modern facility, collaborative space environments. And what does that mean for those law firms who are perhaps trapped? I am curious as to whether you see these grey spaces, these old spaces being sort of, dead zones within cities that struggle to know what to do with these old spaces, and whether some firms are trapped there.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're two very good points, David. I mean, firstly, the war on talent, but this is not necessarily a new thing. This predates COVID. We've seen a lot, particularly the American firms, moving into the very best office space, into the top of towers, looking for sort of those premium views and premium spaces. And that is all about attracting and retaining the best talent. and saying to clients that we've landed a new headquarters, you can see St Paul's, isn't the view amazing? But a lot of this is about having the best space. And I think one thing I say to clients quite a lot is, with post-COVID now, it's not enough to say to your employees and your colleagues, come to the office, here's a desk and a computer screen and a phone, because they'll say, well, I've got that at home. So if you come into the office, I need to give you an experience. It's about being able to collaborate. It's about having a space that you can work flexibly in. It's about having a space that you feel proud of as well. And that's another reason why we see particularly these large top 20 or magic circle firms really considering, moving from some of them quite good buildings they're in already into brand new buildings.
Yeah, really interesting. I think that best of class property is a really interesting point. And just the other bit I picked up on there, Henry, as well, is everyone's battling with all of the implications of the last 18 months, but then you have these other overarching sort of drivers around sustainability, which is a huge driver as well. So trying to balance all of the tactical stuff coming out over the last 18 months, while these big, long, strategic sort of plays around sustainability, yeah, incredibly challenging. Yeah, really insightful. Thank you. So I think just sort of, Dave, probably now just sort of expanding it out slightly more. So, I think us all coming together as suppliers talking around this topic is a sign of this, but internally, how are you seeing like different functions, in terms of the way they're collaborating in their strategies for hybrid working policies within the firms that you're dealing with?
Yes, you're right. Partners like we are, we've started to talk about how we have a joined up approach to sort of market for offering sort of holistic solutions that address many things. And that means that, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything that our viewers don't already do in a way, but having that holistic approach to setting strategy and policy across various functions. Things can't and really shouldn't be done in isolation anymore. Facilities shouldn't be driving office sort of buildings without having very close collaboration talks, not just with their internal IT teams, but with the partnership base, because solutions to problems you need to think across the piece. So, I mean, I'll be very brief on this, but I think probably strategy boards at a very high level across the piece. I think projects need to have the right stakeholder groups again across the pieces. I think maybe at the beginning though, consultation is maybe more important before groups of people come together and make strategic decisions. I think the consultation piece with your employer base, with your fee earner base is and across the piece, not just senior fee earners, but junior fee earners as well, I think is very important to get the pulse and get the feeling of what people are saying in your business before you then go into these sessions. I mean, the clue's in the name of collaboration, but it's probably just an absolute essential must-have rather than a nice-to-have. It's I think it's probably key to making the right decisions here. It's a sort of harmony of approach, and of course the things you decide to do, I think, are going to have a big impact on 12 months down the line, whether people feel as though they want to stay with you or whether you're attractive to attracting the right people. So these exercises amongst one another are more pressing. I think that we have that type of collaboration.
Yeah, so I think that if I look back at the sort of 2 or 3 months since we've been talking, seeing that sort of wasted investment over the last 18 months where decisions were being made in isolation, either from a people policy perspective or property perspective or technology, without sort of you can just hear from hearing the four of you talk, you cannot make a property strategy without all of those other bits in place as well. It sort of seems a bit of a no-brainer, but that we certainly saw that a lot at ComXo, where an IT department went off and made a decision without considering all of those bits, or a drastic quick decision on property has led to big implications around employee productivity and things like that. So I think it's a really interesting piece, and I know we have certainly a massive part to play as suppliers around making sure that we are coming together, working together collectively. Certainly the problems that we're overcoming, I think, are much larger than they ever have been before. So yeah, really interesting point. So Andrew, you've got hand up on that one.
Just briefly on that. The other thing that I think is startling is the change that law firms are realizing that they need more than just lawyers to run a first-class business. The number of firms that have brought in talent into their support, service admin, chief innovation officers, COOs. This is new for the legal sector, and it's it's a marked change from what we used to see, is that they've understood that it's not just partners that drive the firm, it is the business side as well. And they're starting to morph into proper businesses. So the investment is throughout, not just in the space and the workspace, but in the people that are driving that space to keep and attract the talent.
Just to compliment what Andrew just said there, you absolutely, innovation directors have been around for a little while, but now the innovation directors or transformation directors that are being brought in, it's not about IT per se, it's about business transformation, thinking about how we work transformation, the new world. It really is, these new lateral and important hires are beginning to make a difference. And actually another bit of feedback from the conference last Tuesday was that some law firms have been accused of thinking very internally about digital transformation and innovation. And by that, and it was some clients from EasyJet and from Fujitsu making this point to internal and external counsel, that your billable hour efficiency and productivity is not digital innovation. Spending more time with your clients, asking them what they need, is really part of the digital innovation story that you need to be part of. So it's an interesting trend from last week coming out loud and clear.
Cool. So just sort of jump out of legal for a little bit, and I might frame this one to you, Andrew, but Henry, Matt, you have similar sort of exposure. So yes, there's a big focus on legal for all of us, but I know here at ComXo, we have clients like PwC. Andrew, works with us as a sort of agile working partner. What does a company like PwC or some of these other sort of professional service organisations, what can they sort of teach the legal sector about hybrid working? Obviously, they've embraced it, a long time before the pandemic. And I guess any insights you can share from those relationships?
Yeah, well, PwC, they centralised, optimised and virtualised their back office services 4 years ago. And we were lucky enough to partner with them to do that. So I always point my law firms at PwC and say, these guys have been living and breathing it for 4 years. It is interesting to note that as a business, PwC, who went mobile, in other words, they got rid of their desk phones, they got rid of their office space and went completely open plan and agile 4 years ago, have got everybody back into the office. I think that's quite insightful. They realise that they are a human-based service, and humans are more creative when they meet together, as Henry said this morning. It is a relationship, human relationships that drive change and move things forward. The other thing with PwC that they can teach us is that they maximize the use of their office space. When we did the work for them 4 years ago, it was to cut their office space by 12% and to have a much smaller percentage space than they needed for the amount of people they had in the business. So we work with them on our room bookings and desk booking services on we have a managed reservation service. So we know all of the spaces across their 30 offices in the UK. We've been up and seen every one of them. Our teams understand what's in each office, what's in each space. You can self-serve book those spaces, but then what we do as a managed service is we shift them all around, a bit like a restaurant, and we publish where you're going to be, which office, 24 hours beforehand. So they've realized that the adding of a human being into that process rather than just technology actually maximizes the space. Very much, as I said, like a restaurant. You book your table, you don't know where that table is until you turn up to the restaurant itself. Of course, you need to make sure it's got the right AV and it's got the right number of seats, but you make sure that you don't have a 3-person meeting in a 15-person office space. And that has driven substantial utilization of space and enables them to be able to drive the sort of productivity out of the space that they've got. And I think that's interesting, the rise of the managed service. Again, somebody from PwC, one of our contacts, said they've realized over lockdown that people want to deal with people. And before lockdown, they were looking at technology and bots doing a lot of stuff, interaction. Now they're moving away from that, and they're saying actually the human interface is what people are much more comfortable with, because the bot is great if it's 100% right. But the minute it fails, it brings huge frustration and friction into the process, and it drives everybody mad. So it's the human enabled, technology enabled human, which is driving these sorts of services through. And I think that's quite insightful.
Yeah, no, great. And I think it's really interesting going back to sort of some of those stats, Henry, that you were talking about. Law firms traditionally set up with that sort of 1-to-1 ratio. It was hugely extreme to even go to 1-to-2, but you're talking about 22 Bishopgate, a law firm trying to achieve a 1-to-8 ratio in that working environment. The ability for managed service tech, business services all come together to be able to deliver that is going to be extreme, because that is a huge shift in mentality, that law firms have, the way they've conducted themselves, in recent times, isn't it? It's absolutely massive.
Yeah, I think the benefits of nearly all new buildings in the city now are going to offer 1-to-8 as a minimum density ability, which for those of us that effectively means that you can get one person per 8 square meter into that space. The air conditioning, lighting, loading, everything else is all geared to allow that to happen. Now, back probably 5 or 6 years ago, the banks and the technology companies were using that to drive as many desks into a space as possible, primarily around open plan working. Now, I don't think that's ever going to be right for a law firm. It's certainly not based on my current experience of law firms, but I think what a building like 22 Bishopgate allows an occupier to do is to use the space in a much more flexible way. What are the issues that we tend to get with things like fan coil systems or VAV systems is the inflexibility of being able to put either a cellular or open plan workspace in one area. And what a high performing building like 22 Bishopgate allows you to do is to have a variation of different working areas. And I think this is what occupiers are going to have to provide their staff, because there is times when people need to move into small, quiet areas to sit and do some concentrated work. And there are other times when they want to be able to collaborate. And particularly one of the reasons I think people will want to come back to the office is to have an open collaboration area where there's all the technology and the communication toys that are needed to sort of start these sorts of discussions. So as I said, I don't think we'll end up with the kind of the chicken coop idea of the trading floor, but absolutely it does mean that in a hybrid working environment, they can really sweat the real estate to work. And that's one of the reasons why we see law firms moving to these brand new buildings and sometimes paying some quite high rents, because they can underwrite that sort of move strategy by taking less space, but using it better.
No, incredibly interesting, and it's a huge shift in mentality, isn't it? But incredibly insightful. David, I'm going to go back to one of those. You sort of alluding to this earlier. I'm probably going to ask you 2 questions in one, if that's okay. So, we spoke about earlier sort of inequalities in the homework setup, existing mainly sort of with the younger, more junior staff, but it's the more comfortable, I've got to be careful how I say this, slightly older generation who are making decisions on these policies. What do you see the dangers there, and just a little bit of a touch on this sort of, this disconnection and disparity between home and in the office setups, and how that could be a detractor from encouraging people back into these offices if you haven't gone as far as what Henry just mentioned in some of these more modern buildings. Give me some thoughts around that from a IT tech perspective.
Well, yes, without wanting to call myself old, I'm in a nice office with a nice sofa in the corner, and I have my Sky TV over here and dual screens and all very, very nice things. And that's not that's a perfect home environment work office for me. And it's not something that exists for a great many people. I think one of the dangers here is that we're 18 months into this, and we've all sort of moved on in our thinking, oh, home working is fine. Now we can continue with home working and hybrid working. And perhaps what might get lost is that actually home working is not fine for a great many people, certainly younger people in flat shares, still living on the bank and the home of mum and dad, and not necessarily in environments where actually they have pure isolated, if you like, in the sense of being able to concentrate without distraction work environments. And so that creates an inequality between the generations. I think it leads on to other things as well, because my mum's going to watch this, I'm sure. My mum's a lawyer, and I have to be careful what I say now. And she's of an age coming up to retirement, not quite there yet. I'm very happy to work from home as a private client lawyer. She's done all her learning. She was in the office for that in a younger generation. If I look into my career in the past, I look back and couldn't imagine learning all the things I've learned if I wasn't there, if I wasn't with people to learn it from. Interestingly, another word that came out on Tuesday was osmosis. Used a lot by a lot of people. We learn by doing, by being around. It is difficult it is untangible it is difficult to measure because that's the osmosis of it. It just happens because we are surrounded by people and information, and our collaboration, as Andrew said before, is better when we are together. The technology isn't, I think, quite there yet for replicating that osmosis of environment, or we've not at least applied the tech yet or created the solutions to do that. The meetings are still formalized and set up, and what the water cooler moments and all the rest of it are not happening. And one of the conversation points was, we're going to find out about this 10 years from now, right? Because we'll have rubbish lawyers. And there's not to be rude to anyone, but we'll have lawyers going into their 30s and 40s who are not very good, and then we'll be able to measure it. And it's simply because they've not had the benefits of that collaboration that they had when they were in those previous work environments. Now, you might not be able to measure it, but there is a common sense test. The common sense test says, if you're not spending a lot of time as a younger lawyer learning from your peers, learning from your superiors and your supervisors, then you're going to be less well off or less informed and less experienced as you go. So there's inequalities physically, I think, in some workspaces. We can't just because it's been 18 months think it doesn't exist. It does. And that's why I said the consultation element is very, very important. And we need to think about, actually, if we're going to have hybrid work environments, when you're not in the office, when you're at home, okay, how are we keeping them included? I think a few of my panelists suggested that if you're having a meet, when we were all at home, we were all on Teams and Zoom like this, and it was equal. We were all there together. Now there's 4 of you in an office space having a meeting. Every now and then you hear a cough behind you, and it's the people on the screen saying, don't forget we're here too, because you tend to get into the collaboration with the people in front of you, and it's a sort of afterthought for the people struggling on the left to get in on what is going on. Now, I think there are technology solutions to this, that there are software solutions or collaboration tools. I just think it has some way to go, and I think that should be part of the thinking when we're designing our new worlds for this next 12 and 18 months, because we have to think about these things, because we don't want to get 10 years down the line and go, whoops.
Yeah, and I think we spoke at great length about that osmosis learning. You know, when I look back at my career, you know, I've worked 15 years with Andrew. It's all been osmosis. You know, it's going out and working with partners and spending time with people, which is certainly limited. And I think, you know, when you look at the market now in almost any industry, you know, it won't be long until you can start tracking progression with people's attendance into office or time around different people by just looking at the data sources of their desk booking or their room booking or their security logging in at, you know, in the offices. You know, it won't be long until we'll have that sort of data. So I think that's a really interesting piece. And just, I guess,
just going back to the human factors of that, going to the pub after work for a drink with the people you work with is sometimes a way to resolve issues or differences or confusions and things that come up. You go and have a drink, you sort it out, and you feel a bit better about the world, and you're forming human collaboration when you're coming together as people. That shouldn't be underestimated. That human element of how we work with one another, develop relationships with one another, professional relationships, and resolve things is also not there when we're not together.
Yeah. And I think just, you know, before I've got a sort of a question, I think, to finish on, but I just want to sort of focus a little bit around sort of, you know, this ready available data that I mentioned during my intro. And Andrew, you know, we spend a lot of time doing this. You know, we collect, you know, our technology collects a lot of data. You know, every transaction that we do, you know, we track. You know, can you share with us just how we collect it, process it, and just some examples, even in the shorter term, you know, relative to now, in terms of how that's positively impacted our clients?
Yeah, well, I've spoken about centralizing, optimizing, and virtualizing, you know, office services. The digital dividend, of course, is the ability to collect data on every single transaction that is happening within an organization. So we track every call that comes into and across an organization and who it goes through to. We track every call or request within the organization. And what that enables us to do is gather all of this data, transform it into business intelligence. And then what we do is we play it to the human element who are actually involved in taking those calls, and we produce it back to our clients as insight. our clients don't want data, they don't want business intelligence, they want to know, what does that mean for me? And so we always discuss it as being able to shine a spotlight into areas of their business which they have no visibility into actually what's going on from the human factor. So for instance, in law firms, and I'll now talk about more consumer-based law firms, we have one which receives a vast number of calls. They had no idea whether those calls were valuable calls, what happened to the calls after they got into the organization, whether they got through to a partner or a lawyer, or whether they went through to voicemail. They had no idea of how many cold calls they got. Transitioning all of that into the virtualized service they now have, they don't have to deal with cold calls because we get rid of all of them. And we know that once if you manage to get rid of a cold call, it will save partners having to deal with them, or anyone else in the organization having to deal with them. Drives productivity. If your people within your law firm know that every single call that's coming through has been properly screened and prioritized, and they're not going to get any dross, so in other words, it's going to be a value call guaranteed, they're quicker to pick up the phone. They pick up the phone with enthusiasm, better client experience. And we're monitoring all of that, but we're also able to show that on a Friday afternoon, we had one client, their conveyancing department used to clock off early. Well, that happened to be a very busy time for their organization, because everybody wants to know before they get home and chat with their husband or wife what's happening to the property. And so we were able to work with them to say, actually, Friday afternoon's a really busy time. Everybody go to the pub on Wednesday afternoon because that's particularly quiet. And so really shining a spotlight into organizations that makes valuable differences to them, that drives their economic engine, drives their productivity, and by that way, makes their workforce happier, that they are actually doing valuable work, purposeful work, rather than wasting their time. So collecting, managing, prioritizing, and turning data into insight is what the digital dividend ought to be.
Yeah, and as a group, what's everyone's view? It's this topic today. We've touched, pretty much all parts of the business within the last, 40 minutes. The need to overlap our data to provide sort of 360 holistic insights can be really, really important, isn't it? Because if we can start seeing, David, how people are working, in their IT environment, but then also interacting, with a help desk feature, downloading HR information, or well-being policies, being able to overlap the two, and obviously weaving in that, what people are doing with their property and other business services, being able to present that back as a unified report, with a holistic view of everything that's going on, it just takes it to the next level. Clients have to work very, very hard, is if suppliers were just providing singular data feeds and almost have, allowing them to sort of have to sort of make out what's going on with it. Any thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, Paul, I know there's a question coming from one of our people sort of a little bit on this about,
Yeah.
I'll let others on this call who know about the technology a little bit sort of answer to it. But yeah, there's a lot of dashboard reporting out there at the moment. Pulling in your various data sources is very important to identify those trends. There's also, by the way, there's some very obvious savings that law firms have made. I mean, print and copy is the most obvious one that has come to hundreds of thousands, if not, in some of the bigger firms, millions of pounds worth of savings. Making sure those bad habits stay dead, by the way, is very, very important as people come back into the office environments. That needs to be measured. You can measure the savings because it's real and it's happened. You need to start tracking those trends as people come back into the environments, because actually, they didn't need to print at home. They shouldn't really need to print in the office. And actually, measuring what is going on, measuring the differences as you bring people back in different ways is very, very, very important. It's difficult to answer because people have different texts and different databases, building data warehouses, plugging into the right sources, looking at the very real-time dashboard style front ends. I know ComXo, I think you have some platforms as well, so sort of in this for measuring those elements. Very, very important, because as we move into this new world, we don't want certain costs to go up because they don't need to go up. It's a bad behavior that needs to be, stay dead.
I want to finish on that sort of the bad habits and making sure they don't return. But I think we've in this question that we've just received in terms of what technologies do you recommend to use to find this data within legal. I think, Andrew, the concept that we talk about in terms of from a client experience, a standard interface. So no matter what you are and what you're trying to achieve, you're following through a single piece of technology that can then expand into other technology systems suppliers. So you're gathering all of that information at entry. Have you got any sort of view on that?
The challenges that we've had is that we layer ourselves over multiple platforms and technologies, and data feeds, and getting the right data feeds in and cleaning them and making sure they're relevant has been one of the hugest, greatest challenges we've had to overcome. What we have done is put managed service in the middle and enable us to collect data from lots of different platforms, consolidate it, triangulate it, and then add a human layer on top of it to try and make sense of it. What technologies are out there? Well, they are manifold, as we all know. And some of the latest ones, particularly workflow type technologies, there's vast numbers of them coming onto the market. The key thing is that the point we find with our clients is that if you're taking on these technologies internally, the question you've got to ask yourself is, who is curating the data that's going in? Who is cleaning it? Who is managing it to make sure that it's all up to date? Because at the end of the day or the month, when you look for that report, it is all about the quality of the data that resides within those systems. If IT are putting in a system, but they're not happy to manage it, curate it, and often that is a problem, then data is going to become irrelevant or outdated very, very quickly. Where we're finding a lot of traction is that we have a layer of people 24 hours a day that are continually cleaning that data and making sure that it's relevant, and making sure that if somebody leaves, that we're backfilling that individual at the end of a workflow, so that the organization, the call flows and the workflows and the value flows across the organization are always up to date and 100%. So that's where I'm saying it's so complex in terms of the technologies that are out there.
Yeah, and just to add, and I'll open this up to the group, but certainly what I'm seeing is, it's really important now that we get, the client experience correct for the staff, so they have a single number, a single touch point to go to access services, to navigate their day. But, we're fully aware that over the next couple of years, it's going to be a continual change of systems, processes. There's every time a policy changes, the desk and room booking policy has to change, or the building changes its ratios. So there's going to be this constant, in a way I always like to describe it, is the engines are going to have to be changed constantly. But what you don't want to be doing is having this overload to your staff of, right, every week there's a new policy update, there's an email going about how do you book this or log this IT ticket. So again, I think that there's this really important period where we deliver a very seamless, consistent experience to the end user, whilst we and other suppliers take out that friction and actually do, that heavy lifting and swap and change those engine and processes, technologies as we go. Anyone got any sort of view on that?
I mean, that's certainly, Paul, that I'm seeing within my client base. I think it's, you mentioned single touch point. I think it's more about reliability of service and the experience. I don't think people mind if it's a good experience and they feel like it's reliable and it's there and they understand it. Then I think people don't mind if it's more than one touch, right? So those, but it's also a big part of change management as well. And I think everything that I've heard today, there's just so much going on. There's so many things touching us: net zero carbon, sustainability, technology, hybrid working in the house. Have I got an office? Have I got a seat to sit on? There's just so much stuff. And I think when there is so much chaos, simplicity always rules and triumphs. And I think that's what occupiers need to look at, and certainly the employee base. So I think somebody mentioned on the call today, engaging with the workforce, asking what good looks like is a real key first step. Don't go off on your merry horse and start creating things and then finding at the end of it, oh, this doesn't actually work, or it's not what my workplace or workforce wanted. So that's certainly what I am engaging with my customer base and saying, look, just take a step back, take a breather, have a think about what you're going to do before you go off and do it, and make sure that it works.
I think Matt, that's absolutely right. A lot of people are confused about because there's been so many changes. They're actually confused about what the status is today. What's the policy today? I know it was sort of yesterday, but it's sort of changed today. What is it tomorrow? And that's one thing I think for us all to be mindful of. I think I'd like a stab at that second question that's come in.
Yeah, no, I was gonna. Like I said, I'm very conscious of time, but I think I'd love someone's view on that, really. So, I think, you know, we've all been to London on a Thursday. That certainly is the new Friday. So, you know, do we think the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday club is that going to push for a 4-day week? Do you think the world is going to change?
I think the 4-day week thing has been around for a while, pre-COVID, and maybe it's been driven. I think actually what is more is a different type of week, or thinking about the week differently, including perhaps some weekends. And I think there's some dangers in there about demarcation between private time. I think actually there's a big problem between what is home time and private time and sort of work time, especially if it's flexible. I think firms are going to come up with policies. We have a sort of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday now, actually. Interestingly, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I think that's part of the problem, is that actually different firms will come to different decisions, and it means actually we might not be able to contact one another easily because, oh well, you know, they're not in of a Friday, they're not available of a Monday, or they're only in of a Wednesday. And I think that confusion, my own view on this is that confusion and that inconsistency will just drive habits back to a little bit more of the norm next year. Because I think as a species, we like to know where we are and everyone is and how we get hold of them. And that tends to drive patterns through time. And that's why I do think it'll change a bit. Andrew, sorry, I'll shush now.
Wouldn't it be nice if it did drive a 4-day week? Unfortunately, law firms are all driven by the immediacy of advice. And I'm afraid to say that the expectation of clients is that advice ought to be on tap 24 hours a day. So whilst we might see people coming back into the office 3 or 4 days a week, in itself a headache for those people managing office space and back office services, catering, etc. I think it will probably end up going more flexibly, but in the other direction, you know, where, you know, that immediacy of data, particularly in law firms. So I'm not sure it will.
That's a really interesting point, Andrew, isn't it? Because I think, you know, we saw this huge drive to 24/7, 365, you know, before the pandemic. So, you know, with an approach to a 4-day week, it does actually conflict itself, doesn't it? You know, people are looking almost for more access to service and a wider range of hours that they had available to them. So I think it's a really interesting point.
It's a critical mass point as well, because I think one of the best phrases that I've heard used, this is FOMO. I think particularly for junior staff, if they feel they're missing out on not just learning opportunities, but office gossip and meetings with clients and seminars and all the good things that do tend to happen in a workplace rather than online, there's a sense that a number of them will want to be in the office, that they're not missing out. And I think it's fair to say within our office, and we came back properly in about April, May time this year, it's the juniors who are working 5-day weeks, and it's the more senior people who are more likely to take a day working from home. And that may be due to the nature of the sort of work that we do as well. And I'm sure it'll be different for law firms. And I think one of the trends I thought was quite interesting, we talked about PwC earlier, just to add in a large American tech company I'm not allowed to name, but if you were to ever go and search for something on the internet, you'd know who they were. They have said that they want all staff back in their office, but they may take up to 6 days a year working from home by prior agreement with their line managers. Now, what that says to me quite clearly is they think everything is about collaboration. You cannot come up with new ideas unless you collaborate. Collaboration happens more easily and naturally in the office, particularly since the average age of their workforce is in the early 20s. So I think that's a fairly good sign, particularly since that's where the financial services sector is. They're bringing in the same types of people and they want that kind of same cross-border collaboration. I don't think, I mean, I'm obviously going to say this, it's a loaded question for me, but I don't think the office is dead. And I do think that there is a sense that a lot of occupiers will, as they start to come back to the office, find more and more of a sense of community and more of a sense of collaboration that will continue to drive a longer term trend, as everyone else has said, back to the office. Whether it's 5 days a week or some kind of hybrid closer to 4 days a week, I think time will tell, and it'll depend on sectors and individual firms to make their minds up on how that's going to work.
Great. I think we could probably go on all day, but I like to be punctual. So I think it's fair to say we've covered a lot of areas there and we could have gone on for days. But I think following on from today, you know, the aim is we'll be looking at creating a white paper, condensing everything we've said and sort of have a sort of checklist to summarize a number of these points to give some tools to help you explore these areas in a little bit more detail. I think this topic, will evolve, and as partners, we know how important this insight is to you as clients. So we'll ensure that we keep our fingers on the pulse, and at suitable intervals, I think, come back to this network to once again share how the industry's moved on. 3 months is a long time at the moment. So, this will evolve. There will be new learnings, there'll be new data feeds, there'll be new insights. So, we will continue, our promise is we will continue to do that, just to, ensure we're sharing that. So I'd just like to thank the speakers for today for sharing their insight and knowledge on this topic. If you have any questions for any of our speakers, please don't hesitate to get in touch directly. There will be a feedback survey that we sent out at the end of this as well, which, if there is any request for follow-up, please make a note there. But that just leaves me to say thank you again, and we look forward to welcoming everyone to the next webinar. So thank you. Thanks you all. Many thanks.